we're going to be looking at the Constitution and explain why the hell it is impossible for people that we actually elect to actually uphold it, and why it's difficult for them to get it between their tiny split pea-sized brains to understand that it is not that difficult. Historically, we should understand that this is the currently out of active documents. This is the tiniest document out there of all active documents, and it should not be that difficult. Yet we still find people that cannot even get it through their tiny brains that it is not that difficult to understand. Now we're going to go under the actual preamble first, as we the people. First, this is not basically a collective. This is meant as we the people, as individuals. Now people of Congress try to assume this is as a collective. We was actually meant to be assumed as individuals coming together in order to form a perfect union. This is what it was meant for, as we, as in a group of states. This is what the we was referring to as what in this case, to establish justice. Now, justice is meant as equal justice. It does not mean that there's people above the law. Hello, people. We do not have people such as Hillary Clinton above the law, and that we can start basically saying these others are basically going to be prosecuted and have their lives ruined because we don't like them, and we're going to essentially politicize the such departments as the FBI. And we'll explain some other things later with it, why some of these departments shouldn't even exist. And it's to ensure domestic tranquility. Well, frankly, this is not even come close, because they can't even do that. Because the fact is, we have people in the legislative branch from the Democratic side who basically have nothing better to do but to actually grandstand for political reasons, and are actually trying to cause political violence because they want to make their political cachet bigger. Cory Booker, I am looking at you to provide for the common defense. When we look at this, we're looking at a lot of right-wingers and a lot of the neoconservatives on the left-wing side as well. This does not mean that we have to be the policeman for the whole world, or start playing we need to defend every single country. We're not Israel's military. We're not the whole world's military. We only provide safety for the United States only, and our property. That's it. Nothing more. To promote general welfare. This is the one the left tends to want to abuse. It does not say pay for welfare. It just says promote. This just means that basically you need to essentially provide the opportunities for such things as charities to exist, and essentially tell people out there that it is good nature to give to other people. That is it. Nothing more. There's nothing more to this. And secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Basically, this is what a lot of people out there have not even done. They don't even care a damn bit about liberty. They've essentially wiped their backsides with the Constitution. They don't care one bit about liberty. They just care about spending a huge boatload of money. And you'll see that with all these departments that they've added, such as the TSA, such as the FBI is not even constitutional, the NSA is not even constitutional, Homeland Security is not even constitutional, Department of Education is not even constitutional. None of this garbage is constitutional. And because it actually goes against the ideas of liberty. All these need to go. If it is not directly stated within the Constitution itself, it needs to go. And as we continue to ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States of America, basically to establish this as a document. Now we go on to Section 1. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in the Congress of the United States shall consist of the Senate and House of Representatives. This means that the Judicial Department can't play judicial activism. They cannot change laws and be legislators from the actual bench. That means they need to end it. That means they cannot have deference to any specific group, and they cannot have actual abilities to change laws to basically try and make them constitutional. If they are not constitutional as written, they need to be sent back and told that they are not constitutional. If this means they will not pass, such as the ACA, that means that they are dead on arrival. Section 2. The House of Representatives shall be composed of members chosen every 2 years by the people of every state, and electors of each state shall of the qualifications requisite of electors of the most numerous branch of state legislature. No person shall be a representative who is not attained the age of 25 years and been 7 years a citizen of the United States, and who shall not, when elected, be an inhabitant of the state in which he shall be chosen, which refers to he or she in that case. And basically that just refers to the qualifications thereof. This is something that is the basic qualifications. You have to be a citizen of the country, and you have to be at least 25 years old, and an inhabitant of that state, whatever the state inhabitant rules happen to be. Representatives and direct taxes shall be appropriated among those states which may have concluded within this union according to the direct numbers, which shall be determined by adding the whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of 2 years, including Indians not taxed 3/5 of all other persons. Now, this 3/5 clause was actually because what the southern states were actually doing was actually they were trying to count slaves, which were not given any rights at the time. They were essentially using this to boost their actual numbers, to actually get more representation, to actually create a dominance within that region, and this was what was done. And they created this 3/5 clause to essentially eliminate that from being done. That was essentially a old version of kind of gerrymandering from a national level, of trying to control the way the actual House of Representatives was actually created for population. They were trying to essentially control it from the actual way it was being used, and they wanted to essentially ensure that slavery remained by ensuring that the slaves were counted, but the slaves never had a vote. Now, what this 3/5 clause did essentially was it reduced their population numbers down as they were being counted, to essentially assume that they were not getting these slaves counted because they were not voting, and this assumed that they were not going to essentially cheat the system by telling people that they that were not allowed to vote, that they were going to count in the census for the actual voting numbers for the state, but not being able to actually vote. And the actual enumeration shall be 3 years after the meeting of Congress of the United States, and within every subsequent term of 10 years, and every such manner shall the law direct. Basically, that this goes into the actual way that the actual setting is going to be set. The number of representatives shall not exceed one for every 30,000, but each state shall have at least one representative, and until such enumeration shall made, the state of New Hampshire shall have one entitled shoot 3, Massachusetts 8, Rhode Island and Province Plantations 1, Connecticut 5, New York 6, New Jersey 4, Pennsylvania 8, Delaware 1, Maryland 6, Virginia 10, North Carolina 5, South Carolina 5, Georgia 3. When vacancies happen, representatives from the state executive authority thereof shall issue writs of election to fill these vacancies. House of Representatives shall choose a speaker, and other officers shall have the power of sole impeachment. Basically, this is those numbers were actually given at earlier times based on population, and the other points are basically that the parties will basically choose their leadership, and they will have essentially the sole power of impeachment should that come up as a necessary point. Now, Section 3 goes over the Senate. The Senate shall be composed of 2 senators by each state chosen by the legislature thereof for 6 years. Each senator shall have 1 vote. Now, this was what was originally set. This was before they actually made a constitutional amendment to actually change this to the people. Now, this was done to appeal to a popular vote idea that's so the people could actually have the idea that they were actually choosing it. Now, the reason why they did this initially by the state legislature was because to avoid any idea of the a popular vote and actually the most populous areas within the state making the actual decisions for the whole entire state. As we see, it can be a problem in many states, where basically all you have to do is visit the most populous cities and you win. In such cases like Minnesota, essentially, if you win the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, you pretty much win the senator's seat. And that's all you have to do is win that area, and that's really not fair. But if you talk about the congressional seats, that becomes, for the House of Representatives, that becomes a lot more difficult because you have to win your actual regions. And that's where these ideas of having the legislature choose within the state, that's why this actually existed initially, to actually eliminate this whole problem of the actual popular vote, because a popular vote was never meant to be, as we are a representative republic, not an actual direct democracy, as direct democracies lead to tyranny. And that was what was initially meant, as you will actually see with a lot of the history of our country. Immediately after the sum of consequence of the first election shall be divided equally in the 3 classes. This seats of senators of the first class shall be vacated at expiration of the second year, the second class expiration of the 4th year, and the third class expiration of the 6th year. And this basically shows when each of the senators leave, is basically so you don't have the vote of the senators happening every year, so you're not voting on 100 senators each year. This will essentially, so you're not complicating the vote. So you basically have essentially roughly about 33 to 34 senators leaving each year. So not every state is essentially voting on all of their regions. So we don't have 535 people leaving office in each year. So it ends up being much lower. So it ends up being about 460 people leaving each year and being up for office. But in this case, you have to be minimum 35 years or 30 years old and nine years a citizen, and be an inhabitant of the state as well. The VP acts as the president of the Senate. That's meant to split the vote. This is obvious. These are basic things that everybody should have learned. And a lot of people in this Senate with it don't, because we're getting people from other countries that are basically just taking a basic citizenship test and not even paying attention to it, getting passed right through and being let in, or we're basically getting people that are being raised here and not even being taught anything. The Senate shall have other officers, such as a president pro tempore, in absence of the vice president, when he shall exercise the president of the United States. This is basically when the true president is out on some type of duty. He shall do that, and the Senate shall have sole power of all impeachments. This is for the actual impeachment trial, for removal from office. After the House of Representatives has voted for the actual impeachment itself, you'll have the actual for removal. When sitting for this purpose, they shall take an oath or affirmation the president is tried, with Chief Justice preside, and no person shall convicted without occurrence of 2/3 of the members present. Basically, you need 67 votes in this case for that to happen. Especially in nowadays system, that is never going to happen. Doesn't matter what you have with it, it is way too complicated. Judgment in cases shall not extend further than to remove from office and disqualification to hold any higher office of honor, trust, and proof under the United States, but party convicted shall nonetheless be liable to the subsequent indictment, trial, judgment, and punishment according to the law. Now we're on to Section 4. Times, places, and manners of holding elections of the senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof, but Congress may at time make law to alter such regulations except place of choosing senators. Congress shall assemble at least one in every year, meeting such as shall be the first Monday in December, unless shall be appoint a different day. This is just basically law over the actual how the choosing of the elections are done. Each house shall be the judge of elections, return of qualifications of its own members. Majority in each shall constitute a quorum to do business, but a smaller number may adjourn from day to day. May be authorized to compel the attendance of absent members in such a manner under such penalties as each house may provide. Basically, they can essentially create their own rules. Each house may determine the rules as its proceedings, punishes members for disorderly behavior with concurrence of 2/3 and expel a member. Basically, it's saying if members acting out of order, it's stating that they can essentially expel a member. And I think but because we're talking with the House of Representatives that it's always going to be near split, we're always going to see, and with members protecting their own, I think we're never going to see this, even if we see, especially with Democrats doing their lie-in last year on their gun control garbage, that we should have seen all of those members who have done that expelled from Congress and been replaced for their disorderly behavior. We should have seen that easily, but the fact is it would have taken 2/3, and that would have never happened because it's almost nearly impossible to get a 2/3 in either house, especially nowadays setup, because a lot of people don't like voting in that extreme manner. Each house shall keep a journal of the proceedings. From time to time may publish the same, except parts in which the journal judgment will require secrecy. Yeas and nays member your house may question shall desire 1/5 present shall be entered in the journal. This is just basically going over the actual vote totals, and there's certain things that might require secrecy in which those are not disclosed to the public. Now with this one, with it, what we're seeing with it is we're seeing way too much of the actual votes and information is being kept in secret. Everything in their mother-in-law is being put out there as being, oh, this is too secretive to maintain out to the public. When we have neither house during session of Congress shall, without consent of the other, adjourn for more than 3 days, nor any other place without the other two houses shall be in sitting, basically meaning they have to agree when they adjourn, which is not exactly a problem because they love going on break. As we see, they don't actually like doing their job of actually being there and actually discussing policy. Section 6. The senators and representatives shall receive a compensation for their services as ascertained by law and paid out of the Treasury of the United States, and in all cases except treason, felony, breach of peace, and privilege of arrest during their attendance in session of their respective houses, and going to and returning from the same, and for any speech, debate, or in either house shall not be questioned in any other place. Basically meaning that they get their money no matter what, unless they get basically arrested for some reason. And basically is pretty much, in my opinion, they're getting paid way too much, and they pretty much can vote their own pay raises, as we've seen constitutionally, because essentially they can create their own constitutional amendment, as they did under the Clinton administration and most of the states, because a lot of the governors are not going to oppose, a lot of the governors and houses are not going to oppose it. They're just going to let it pass through, even though they're going to have a lot of people on their backside for doing so. No senator or representative shall, without time in which he is elected, be appointed to any civil office under authority of the United States, shall be created in the annulments whereof shall have been increased during such time. No person shall be holding any office in the United States shall be a member of either house during his continuance of the office. And that's basically is basically they're not supposed to be holding multiple offices at the time, and that's about it with that. Section 7, all bills for raising revenue shall originate in the House of Representatives, but the Senate may propose and concur with the amendments as bills. Now this is a major thing of what affected the ACA, because the fact is they were basically trying to, in one way state it was a spending bill, in another way state it was a fee, and they couldn't get away with both. And this is why they basically tried to rewrite it in the judicial branch. For every bill passed by the House of Representatives and the Senate shall before it become law be presented to the President of the United States. If he approve, he shall sign it, but if not, he shall return it, and his objections to the House, which he shall have originated, who shall enter the objections at large on their journal, and proceed to reconsider it. After the reconsiderations, 2/3 of the House shall agree to pass, but it shall be considered sent together with the objections by the other House, which likewise considered. If approved by 2/3 of the House, it shall become law. But in the cases the House's vote shall be determined by yeas and nays, the names of the persons voting for and against the bill shall be entered in the journal of each of the House respectively. Basically showing of how the law is actually made in Section 7, which is simple. I mean, everyone, and now when we get to Section 8, is Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imports, and exercises, pay debts, and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. But all duties, imposed exercises shall be uniform throughout the United States. Now, power to lay and collect taxes. Now, the problem being with this is it never defines on a term of taxes with it. It only what it called states it in a general sense. What taxes actually originally meant were actually from business only. In the term of what we call income tax is technically not a tax. So guess what, morons in Congress? There is no income tax. And stop enforcing it. And it does not. And it says Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes. This means there is no actual need for a executive branch for finance. There is no need for an IRS. These are illegitimate groups. We don't need them. They're actually unconstitutional. Duties. These are actual what I call other forms of taxation. These are actually what would apply to businesses as well. Imposts and excises. These are more likely what would end up hitting people during their purchases to pay debts and provide for the common defense. This basically they only have to pay debts is when they're spending more than what they're actually bringing in. The common defense is what the term common defense refers to is the common defense of the states and the U.S. territories. There is no common defense beyond that. When we came up with the term of common defense for actually Europe and these other countries, that meant something completely different. When it means common defense in this term, it means something that actually is well beyond this. General welfare does not mean that you're actually providing something of value. This means you're basically providing the opportunities for things to happen, which means you're creating a system in which capitalism can thrive and that you can have voluntary exchanges. This is such things as one state can trade with another without one state trying to impose duties on another. This is what was meant to happen, and this is the way a general welfare was meant. It was not meant to mean all that. And then it goes, but all duties, imposts, excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. This is where it actually continues on its point. That's why we see a semicolon right there. And it says to borrow money on the credit of the United States. Now this is only meant in the case that where it's actually needed. But it's also meant that if this money is to be paid back, not that it's going to be keep borrowing. To regulate commerce with foreign nations. This is and among several states and with the Indian tribes. This is basically the reason why it says among several states is basically to ensure that states are not imposing sanctions on other states. This does not mean that you can actually intervene. It was not meant to intervene when it said regulate. It was meaning to essentially ensure that trading went smoothly. This was all it meant. It did not mean to actually mean like an actual regulation like what we're thinking as regulations. It meant to ensure that there were no actual duties and actual things put back and forth. It meant to make sure that basically all the relations were happening smoothly and essentially act as an intermediary, so essentially everything was working smoothly. Next, it was to establish a uniform rule of naturalization, basically ensuring that everyone has a fair shot at this naturalization. Uniform law of subject of bankruptcies through the United States, obviously. So essentially, if you have to claim bankruptcy, that there is a normal rule for setting up that as well. To coin money. This is another key one. It did not say to print money. It never states to print money. This is where it states this right here. It says to coin money. There's a reason why. It's because it was never meant that we were supposed to have a fiat currency. It meant for us to only have an actual currency based on actual metal coins. This was actually made specifically for actual gold and silver coins only. This is what our system was based on. It wasn't based on a fiat currency based on useless paper. And this is what anything based on a useless paper is unconstitutional. Regulate the value thereof, which is was to establish these gold markets and silver markets and put the money thereon, and essentially mark the coins of a value and a foreign coin. Basically, is to essentially show from the actual value of the U.S. currency next to foreign currency, and fix the standard weights and measures. Basically, this was all done to essentially create a value of what the U.S. Currency was next to foreign currency. And this was not done through an actual fiat currency. It was done through an actual gold and silver currency only. To provide for the punishment of counterfeiting the securities and the current coin of the United States. As you see, it says coin. It never says any paper currency. This is another major thing. To establish post office and post roads. It only says to post roads. It never says to build them. This means that the building of the roads is not necessary. It only says to post them. This means a freaking sign. And establish post offices. This basically means to establish them. It's not necessary to build them. It only says to basically establish them and create the order to build them. This would put the order basically down to the states and local areas. To promote the progress of science and useful arts. When it says promote, it does not mean to pay for. How many times do we have to explain this? By securing times to authors and inventors and exclusive rights to respective writings and discoveries. Basically, it basically sets up to set that up through the archive system. That's it, nothing more. To constitute tribunals inferior to the Supreme Court. This is basically setting up the courts themselves. To define punishment, piracies, and felonies committed at the high seas, and offenses, the law of nations. What this is basically set up for is initially there was basically crimes done by a lot of other nations, especially when we were dealing with the different Sunni caliphates earlier on in our period. They would use ships, and this was a major part. And this is where things were a lot different then. They were using sea to do attacks on the United States. And this is where and then we also find this with the British as well. And it was a lot different back then. To declare war. This is actually something that Congress was meant to do. They were meant to declare war. This is something that we have not done since World War II. Now, we can discuss over the points of World War II, but the fact is we have not declared war. Look at how many wars we've been in since World War II. You know what the answer is? Why we've been in them? The UN said the UN gives us authority. The UN gave the executive authority. If we launch war for less than 90 days, it gives us authority. Really? I don't see it. I see to declare war right here in plain English in the Constitution. The Constitution is not difficult to read. To grant letters of marque and reprisal and make rules concerning captures on land and water. Basically, I don't see anything that says the executive has any power to basically make the rules of war. And yet, we see the executive making rules of war. It says right here that they do not have that. To raise and support armies, but not appropriations of money shall be used longer than 2 years. It appears that we have actually done that for longer than this point. And as far as I know, if you look at Afghanistan, we've been there for 17 years, and we have actually tried to support that army for well longer than 2 years. To provide and maintain a navy. Frankly, with it, okay, we've done that. To make rules of government and regulations on land and naval forces, fine. To provide calling forth the militia to execute laws of union, suppress insurrections and rebel invasions. We don't even allow for a militia, because of the fact is the government calls them domestic terrorists, because they say, oh, you guys have guns. And any group that actually has guns, they call domestic terrorists. Nowadays, they call them right-wing extremists. And because the fact is, we have a government that actually doesn't believe in the actual Second Amendment. To provide organizing and arming, disciplining the militia and governments, such as be them employed in the service of the United States, reserving to the United States, respectively appointed by officers and authority to training the militia according to the discipline provided by Congress. We don't even see any type of reaction with them, except for wanting to arrest them. To exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over the district not exceeding 10 miles may be secession in particular states, which they've always tried to block. Acceptance of Congress shall cede the government of the United States to particular like authority over places, consent the legislature of the United States. Same shall be for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needing buildings, and to make laws such necessary for proper carrying of execution of foregoing powers and other powers needed by the Constitution of the government of the United States and any other department officer thereof. What that means is there is no authority for us to actually make buildings and military places overseas. It only gives it for actually within the United States. It gives them the authority to do it within the United States, but not above. Section 9, migration of persons to any of states now shall think proper to admit shall not be prohibited by Congress prior to 1 year 1888, but tax duty shall be imposed on such person for importation not exceeding $10 each person. Privilege of writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless cases of rebellion and invasion. No bill of attainder. No capitation or other direct tax shall be laid unless prohibition of the census enumeration here and there less taken. No tax or duties laid upon the articles exported from any state. No preferences shall be given to any regulation of commerce, revenue of the ports, or any of those of the other. No money shall be drawn from the treasury, but in consequence of appropriations from law by regular statement of the accounts of and expenditures of all the money published by any time. Basically, that means that we're talking with that one is that only the only the appropriations can be actually made for the pulled money from the Treasury, and it only can be actually made based on what is actually set in the budget. And basically, when we state, oh, we're going to take money out of the Treasury to give it to Venezuela, that's not legal. We can't just flat out do that. We can't just flat out just make up things out of the, and that is not constitutional. No child. But the fact is this is not exactly something that Trump has done alone, because it was before Trump. It was actually under Obama as well. So for those saying, oh, let's hang Trump, we gotta hang Obama as well. So let's go out and grab Obama and hang his ass. No title of nobility shall be granted in the United States. Well, gotta call Obama, because he actually wanted to be king. And we have a lot of people who have actually been, have had positions outside as well, and no person holding office as a prophet, trust shall, without consent of Congress, accept any president, a moment, office, title, or any kind of whatever, king, prince, or any foreign state. This means basically when they are going out to these foreign events, they essentially cannot do so, because it essentially they're essentially taking some type of title of, in these other places they're taking some type of title of nobility, because when they do so, they're essentially granted essentially places on these groups, which is essentially a title of nobility, and essentially from another group. And it doesn't matter that it's not from an actual state, which it does not have to be from a state. No state shall enter in a treaty, alliance, or federation, which we see that right away with it. That's an actual violation, because we're seeing BDS legislation coming from many different states. This shows an actual alliance with another state. Grant letters of marque or reprisal, coin money, emit bills of credit, which we've seen a lot of states do with it, because the fact is they feel that if the government can do it, they can do it. Make anything but gold and silver coin tender, in which that is legal, in payments of debt, pass any bills of attainder, ex post facto law, or law impairing the obligation of contracts, grant any title of nobility. And we see that a lot of states have actually tried to grant titles of nobility by actually stating this is such and such day, and that technically is a title of nobility. But I think when it comes to the actual thing, we can actually let that pass, because we need to view the states as superior to the actual Congress themselves, because this is something where basically this is something so small. Now we look at no state shall, without the consent of Congress, lay any imposts or duties, imports or exports without be absolutely necessary for executing the inspection law, and that produce of duties, imposts laid by any state on imports or exports shall be the use of the Treasury by the United States, and all such laws be subject to revision and control of Congress. Now, basically, I think we can declare that this would basically be a what it calls law that we can pretty much state on the open end is fining companies, like in California, fining companies who have actually allowed for ICE to come in and fining the company as some type of a duty, essentially the way it goes, because essentially they're using that to raise money for their legal fees of these people, and just because of a political dispute. No state shall, without consent of Congress, lay the duty of tonnage, keep troops, ship of war, in time of peace, enter in any agreement or compact with another state, with another foreign power, or engage in war unless actually invaded or imminent danger, and will not admit of delay. We see that with states such as New York and California. They've actually made statements such as being able, stating that they've been more than willing to work with states such as France and Belgium on the UN climate accord because the president exited it. And this is essentially what you're doing is you're essentially entering into an agreement or compact with another state or foreign power. Yes, it is not technically engaging into war, but this is essentially a violation. Now, when we go on to this, we're going on to Article 2. Now, we're just going to go into the top 3 articles with this one, because I think there's plenty enough to discuss. The executive power shall be vested in the President of the United States. He shall hold office during 4 years, together with Vice President, shall be chosen in the same term, be elected as follows. Each state shall appoint blah 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 blah. As we know the basic rules of how the president's thing is, how he's removed, and his basic standing of how it is. Now, when it comes to the second one, the president shall be commander-in-chief of the Army, Navy, and the militia of several states. When called into the service, he may require the opinion in writing of the principal officer of each of the executive departments upon any subject of the duties of the respecting officers. He shall have the power to grant reprieves and pardons offenses of the United States, except in cases of impeachment. Basically, if he's being impeached, he loses those powers. But if he's not, he needs to be left alone. This is why when people are stating that he didn't have the right to dismiss James Comey, well, frankly, he did, because there was no impeachment on him. And when people are trying to state anything otherwise with it, they're completely wrong. And when you look at it, Democrats wanted James Comey just as much gone as the Republicans did. So it was not exactly one-sided if you look at it. He shall have the power and advise the consent of Senate to make treaties, provided with the 2/3 of senators present occurred. He shall nominate and with advice and consent of the Senate shall appoint ambassadors, other public ministers and consultants, judges of the Supreme Court, and other officers of the United States, whose appointments not herein otherwise provide for, and shall be established by law, but Congress may by law vest the appointment of such inferior officers as they think proper in the president alone, in the courts of law, or the heads of the departments. In that case, with it, what we see is because Harry Reid actually did the nuclear option, that's not 2/3 anymore. That is actually down to just majority. And that is essentially, they broke the actual Senate rules. And that was because they wanted to put in people like Sotomayor, because she had bare limit credentials, and some other people that had bare limit credentials onto the courts. And they knew that they were never going to get 2/3 majority. And they basically Harry Reid did this for Obama because he wanted to stack the courts with a couple of people, with Hagen and Sotomayor, because knowing that basically Hagen was not exactly a legitimate pick, as she was more of an extremist view of being a legislating judge, and you have Sotomayor, who really has no experience actually on the bench and was only really picked because of the quota system, as the Democrats like to do, and does not really know anything about judicial law. And it says, now we get to the next part. The president shall have the power to fill up the vacancies that may happen during recess of the Senate by granting commissions that shall expire at the end of their session. Now we saw this with Obama when he tried to pull a fast one and tried to nominate people illegally. We go into the next one. He shall from time to time be given Congress information of the State of the Union, and by the recommended of the consideration by measures he shall judge necessary and expedient, he may on extraordinary cases convene both houses, either of them in the case of disagreement between them respect of the time or adjournment. He may adjourn from time and think proper. He shall receive ambassadors and public ministers. He shall take care that the laws faithfully executed, and the commissioner of the officers of the United States. Basically, faithfully execute the laws of the United States, which means he needs to essentially, whatever laws are passed that are constitutional, he needs to abide by. That's number one. Number two is with the State of the Union address. He needs to essentially give that. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be actually in an actual speech. He can essentially just provide that in paper. This is what a lot of people do not understand. This is historically it's actually been done by paper. It was actually only recently that it was actually done as an actual televised speech. Now all he has to do is submit it in paper and then move on. It's only been a spectacle in more recent years. Section 4, the President, the Vice President, all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. Now, frankly, this is why they try to go after Trump. They try to say he's guilty of one of these crimes, and frankly, we do not have one of them. And each party tries to go after the other person with it, but they need legitimate evidence of one of these, and it's just gotten to be a joke when they try to prosecute under this. When you have something, you have to have legitimate evidence. Now let's go to section 3. The judicial branch, judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court, and as such inferior courts, such Congress may from time to time obtain and establish the judges. Both of the Supreme and inferior courts shall hold their offices during the time of good behavior, shall at stated times receive their services. Compensation shall not be diminished during the time of continuance in office. Basically means a lifetime appointment. Their judicial power shall extend in all cases law and equity arising under the constitutional law of the United States. Treaties made for under their authority in all cases. Ambassadors, other public ministers and consultants, all the authority of maritime jurisdiction, basically stating that it goes to what it calls all the areas it goes between. In all cases affecting ambassadors, blah, 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 blah. It's just basically going to all of it, basically stating that it concerns all the areas that it concerns under. Treason against the United States shall consist only of levying war against them and adhering to the enemies, giving aid to no persons convicted treason, testimony and witness against commission of open court. Congress shall have the power to declare the punishment of treason, but no attainder of treason shall work corruption of blood or forfeiture during the life of a person attained. Now what we see here is we see nothing that states that the legislature has the ability to, judicial has no ability to conduct legislating, and this is key. because the fact is they don't. They've never had the ability to legislate. The executive basically enforces the laws, the legislature creates the laws, and the judicial is meant to find if the laws are constitutional and to actually discuss on the legality of the laws. And that's basically their thing. They're actually supposed to find, and each one's supposed to be a check on one or the other. Each one's supposed to maintain their power. We're going on Section 4, basically, on Article 4, basically Section 1 is going over the full faith and credit, and basically records need to be kept. Basically, is pretty much is we're supposed to be paying our bills. Well, that doesn't always happen because we're just racking up more and more money. Citizens of each state shall be entitled to privileges and immunities of citizens of the United States. Well, frankly, is a person charged with is if that were the case, then we would have some type of level of treatment of when we going from state to state. We would essentially have some type of ability to have our privileges be able to move from state to state, but this is not the case because we're seeing that such things as open carry, such things as concealed carry, people are getting arrested. When people are going to when these citizens are going to other countries, they're not being defended when people are being arrested for having guns on them, such as Mexico. We're basically saying, we're having our State Department, especially under Obama, go, we didn't know, and turning their back on our citizens. This is something that was unconstitutional, what the State Department under Obama did with John Kerry. That was an unconstitutional act. You can't, because essentially we're supposed to have immunities under that. A person charged with in any state with treason, felony, or any crime, who shall free from justice be found in another state, shall demand the executive authority of the state in which he fled delivered to be removed to the state having jurisdiction of the crime. No person held to the service labor of one state under the laws of escaping to another shall, in consequence of any law regulated thereon, be charged under the service or labor be delivered upon the claim of the party whose service labor he may be due, which basically falls under a lot of the laws of these renegade slaves, and that really doesn't much of that doesn't really apply anymore because most of these states will deliver these renegade escaped prisoners nowadays because of the actual balance that they can cause. New states may be admitted and counted, but no new state has formed or erected within the jurisdiction of any other state, nor any state formed within the jurisdiction of two states or part of the state without the consent legislatures of the states concerned, as well as the Congress. This essentially is a little bit different because this would essentially be different as we've actually seen this because we've had states split as they have done so because we've seen cases of secession from other states. And we might even see this possibly with the state of California because California is not exactly a state that's up there with likely staying in one piece. Congress shall have the power to dispose all the needed rules and regulations respecting territory and other property belonging to the United States, and nothing in this Constitution shall be constituted as to prejudicing claims to the United States in any particular state. Now, basically, you would need to petition the United States to do this, but if it would be likely that the state would stay with the United States, it would not be likely that it would be rejected in most cases if there was a legitimate claim. So I doubt that that would happen. The United States shall guarantee every state in this union a republic formed to the government and shall protect each of them against invasion, application of the legislature or of the executive when the legislature cannot be convened against domestic violence. This is basically pretty much what they state is any type of domestic terrorism is they must guarantee any type of attacks. Well, as we see some of the stuff from the left, they essentially have not kept up their word, because we see communist groups like Antifa not exactly keeping up with that, and they don't do their job. Now, obviously, we don't want to go to the point of actually getting to the point of martial law, but that's something dangerous. Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall provoke amendments to this Constitution. This is basically Article 5 is just initially the first part basically discussed about the amendments to the Constitution, and then they shall call for a convention. Basically, this is where it calls for the Article 5 convention. Now, basically, you're going to find people that are going to say, oh, we need an Article 5 convention. Now, if you look at all the stuff I was stating before, if they can't even handle this, how are they going to actually handle a new a new actual constitution? That's what an Article 5 convention is. They won't. I don't even have to go much more into that, because trust me, if they can't handle the smallest document, they can't handle any more than that. And trust me, if they can't handle that, they're a bunch of idiots. All debts, contracted engagements entered into in the adoption of the Constitution shall valid against the United States under this Constitution as the Confederation. Basically meaning whatever debts we incur, we have to pay. And basically, and then it gives the definition under the ratification. Now, if we want to look under some certain key things as well, you're probably going to see other such things as the Bill of Rights, which is another very big key. Which the First Amendment is basically what we're going to be talking about on that, is essentially to make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Now, people automatically assume that this means that you can essentially be free of any religious icons in public and all this other garbage. No, this just means that we're not a theocracy. That's all it means. That basically is there. A government official such as the president cannot state this is the religion and this is what we're going with, and everybody must obey the religion. If they don't, there's punishments. That's all it means. Nothing else. It's basically no law respecting the establishment of religion and prohibiting free exercise thereof. If you don't want to have a religion, you don't have to. If you want whatever religion you want to have, they can't get in the way. That's it. Now, the second one, they cannot abridge freedom of speech. That's it. There is no, but what about this? No, there is no what about this. There's no such thing as hate speech. It doesn't exist. Hate speech is a myth. And then we'll go on to the next part, freedom of the press. Freedom of the press does not just mean the legacy media. It means the whole press. This means independent media. This means foreign media. This means everyone. You get some citizen taking a video of something happening, that counts. You get someone having a blog online or something on YouTube or something on Twitter. Those people count as well. You have WikiLeaks. They count as the press as well. They have the full freedom as well. The right of people to peacefully to assemble. This doesn't give the right for people to go out with Molotov cocktails and blow other people up. This gives you the right to peacefully assemble any way that you want. And then the right to petition the government for redress of grievances. This means when the government screws up, that you can request a redress of grievances from the government, and this means they do have to comply back. Now we're going to go on to the Second Amendment. A well-regulated militia necessary for the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. This does not mean the police. I hate to tell these left-wingers this does not mean the police. The militia is the people, the individuals. And when it comes to right to bear an arm, the right to keep and bear arms, it does not mean it's limited. There is no limitations. And when it comes down to it, there should be no law. When it says right here, shall not be infringed, right there, that is meant not to infringe and not to have any regulations thereof. If the military has some type of arm, you are too. If you want basically some fully heavy-duty machine gun that the military has, and you have the money for it, guess what? You should have full right to get it. That might seem extreme on what I'm stating, but frankly, that's how things go. It doesn't matter if some left-winger goes, oh my God, he's going to have a machine gun. Well, the fact is, if you can afford it, and guess what? The ammunition is not exactly going to be cheap, so you're going to have to be real careful who you want to shoot. It's going to have to be something real important. I don't like the Democratic nominee for 2016 or something. No soldier shall in the time of peace be quartered in any house without consent to the owner in wartime, but in a manner to be prescribed by law. Basically, unless you consent to it, there ain't going to be any soldiers in your house. Now, yes, this hasn't been exactly discussed by any person with it, but since we've gone into some things with it, when we've had such a person such as Obama previously, who actually had the audacity to want to declare martial law in the Philippines when he's not even the president. And this is why he got insulted by their president of the Philippines that the Philippines currently have. That's why he got insulted. And when people go, oh, the audacity of the Philippine president to insult Barack Obama. Well, the audacity of Barack Obama to actually even dare to even consider trying to think of trying to get martial law in a country he's not even a leader of. I don't know if Barack Obama thinks he's the king of the world, but frankly, he's not. Now here's the Fourth Amendment. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, effects, against any reasonable searches and seizures not to be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing places to be searched and persons or things to be seized. This means exactly what it says. This means that if you do not have an individual warrant, guess what? You can't search. This means the NSA. Hello, are you listening, NSA? That you cannot do any type of searches. This means no general warrants. Guess what? Verizon, Sprint, AT&T are not people. They're actually phone companies. Things like Spectrum, things like Comcast. Those are actually cable. Those are actually cable and internet providers. They are not people. Things such as Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. Those are not people. Those are actually social media sites. Guess what? You cannot search those without getting individual warrants for the actual individual people. And it doesn't say, oh, but it's you can't use your BS excuse. Oh, it stops terrorism, because guess what? We actually have evidence that it doesn't. And even if it did, guess what? We have this thing called the Fourth Amendment. Use it once in a while. Because frankly, is we have this, and we would instead of living in a bubble, we would rather actually live with liberty. So frankly, you can kind of go to hell when it comes to actually doing this. When it comes to the Fifth Amendment, no person shall be held for capital, otherwise infamous crime, unless presentment or indictment of the grand jury, except in the case of rising in land or naval forces, or in a militia when actually in service of time, war, or public danger. Nor shall any person be subject to the same offense to be put in jeopardy of life and limb, nor shall be compelled in the criminal cases of witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. This means basically they can't take your stuff. Guess what? When they take your stuff for arresting you, and they basically seize your property, that's illegal. They seize your property and they sell it, that is illegal. Number one. Number two is, guess what? You cannot be forced to testify against yourself and be forced to confess to something you never did. We've seen this a bunch of times legally. And frankly, with as many criminal cases as I've seen, for documentaries, I've a little bit tired of seeing these people go to jail that basically have not done it, because they're basically forcing a person of saying, you don't leave here until you confess to a crime. Then they notify them that, hey, you're going straight to jail. And then another thing is that basically they're not supposed to be have any property taken from them without any compensation. Well, a lot of times is they're not even getting legitimate compensation. And guess what? When you have this idea of compensation, a lot of times they're not even being given fair compensation as well. And the reason why is, hey, Pfizer's coming in, we want them to come in as a business, and because they want to come in, and I just got bought off by big pharmacy, we're saying your house is going to be bulldozed. And this is what ends up happening. The Sixth Amendment, all criminal prosecutions accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy trial. Now, frankly, we can't even guarantee that, because the fact is we are so backed up by immigration cases that we can't even guarantee that. And we're having a lot of these cases that are backed up. And then you're also supposed to have the right to face your accusers. Some of the times your accusers are essentially allowed to stay anonymous. Well, what the hell is that? 7. In suits common to law where value of controversy exceeds $20, the right to trial by jury. This is basically right to trial by jury with it, and that's usually followed. Excessive bails shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. Somebody should tell Kamala Harris that, Miss, I want to enforce the full extent of the law. And then she decides to turn and say, oh, I'm for criminal justice reform. And when she's been a big problem with the whole thing of the whole war on drugs and putting innocent people in prison who basically have done nothing. Because as we see up and down this list, I have seen not once the actual thing of making drugs illegal, and we're going to go down to the other part of showing that it's not illegal. We're going to go down to eight, excessive. Okay, we're on down to 9. The enumeration of the Constitution of certain rights shall be construed to deny or disparage others obtained by the people. And then the powers not delegated to the United States Constitution nor prohibited by the states are reserved to the states and respectively to the people. Basically, is anything basically that does not state directly through this is the power of the people or the states, respectively. So guess what? If it doesn't state it directly within this whole Constitution, you don't have the. Guess what? You don't have the power. Okay, Amendment 11. The judicial power of the United States shall not be construed to an extent to extend to any lawsuit, equity, commended, prosecuted against the United States by citizens of another state or by citizens subject to a foreign state. That just more establishes standing. Amendment 12 basically just established the voting of the VP. Amendment 13. Section 1, neither slavery nor involuntary. This is basically eliminating slavery and involuntary servitude. Now, this is essentially what would get rid of the idea of socialism and communism. This is why socialism and communism are not legal. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or places subject to their jurisdiction. Congress shall have the power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. Now, if you look at this, this is why socialism and communism is not legal, because essentially you are a slave to the state. You do not have any rights. And if you're providing a service, you essentially are forced to provide a service. Such as if you're a doctor, you are forced to provide a service without consent. Article 14 is concerning, Section 1 concerns the Naturalization law. Section 2 is basically stipulations for representatives. Section 3 is basically of taking the oath. Basically, it's just reiterating a lot of the same stuff. Now we're on to number 15. And it basically says you're not going to be denied for the right to vote based on race, color, previous condition of servitude. Well, when we saw the case with the New Black Panther Party harassing people in Philadelphia and harassing white voters who they thought were not going to vote the right way, I think that fits under the idea of race and color. So I think we can actually see that that's not always the case, and we're seeing that they're more than willing to harass people, and that that they're not willing to actually hold up these laws, and actually look, and they're willing to look the other way when it actually benefits them in these certain areas, which is kind of pathetic. That if you're basically if you're this elderly white woman, you can you can be harassed because you might vote for the wrong person. Amendment 16, the Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived without apportionment from among several states without any regard of any census or enumeration. Now you still see that incomes is still a term that is still not defined. But if you look at the definitions of earlier terms, incomes is actually referring to actual business profit. This is actually a term that actually is what it meant. Or no, actually by this point with it, it's actually meaning, this is the one that was by 1913 actually meant, was actually referring to incomes, but at this point it was actually only referring to the highest of incomes, because the fact is we were going into the progressive era at this point, but this was essentially not, this was where we got into some very, very sketchy times where it was questionable if this was even ratified, because they did not actually list the actual meaning of incomes, because the actual original terminology on the of incomes was actually stated as the actual business profit, and they never actually defined what incomes were, which is a major problem. And if you look at back then with it, when we're talking about this for these things with it, they gave the whole thing of, oh, we're just going to do on the upper 1%, the whole upper 1% type of argument, like what people like Bernie Sanders make. And guess what we end up seeing now is the whole thing of where people are getting kind of screwed because of that. This is just a reiteration of the point on the two senators from each state for the 17th, 18th. Was the prohibition on alcohol. Now this is key, because when we look at the elimination of, when we look at the war on drugs, we don't see anything with this. We don't see the such a thing like this amendment. Right of the citizens to vote shall not be denied based on sex, and that's the right for women to vote. that was mainly done with it by the progressives because they thought that they could actually get that. It was actually kind of done as a 2-for-1 by a lot of progressives, thought that they can get women to vote, that they would vote in their favor. Now we go on to this next one, which was mainly just establishing some of the statements, such as if the president died. And this one is basically the 21st. That was the 20th to 21st, is essentially just repealing everything that the previous one the previous problems had caused with the alcohol prohibition, because as we know about that, it just raised crime. The 22nd amendment, this is passed and ratified in 51. This is basically limiting it to 2 terms because of the situation of FDR, probably the nation's worst president. Though it is quite troublesome, as a nation should be able to choose their own president, even though it was the KKK that got him elected. The 23rd, is basically another one is basically concerning the total number of electors for the president and VP. The 24th, which is established and ratified in 64. Basically allows people to vote in what it called regardless if they've have failure to pay poll tax or any other tax. Ratified in 67. This is basically what it called to cover if a president has died, and basically establishes the order of which order of secession. The 26th was ratified in 71 and establishes 18 as the age for voting. And then your last one was essentially back in 92 to basically essentially give the congressman essentially a raise of voting. Now, what we see missing from this is there was no actual statement that shows any ability to form, such as any of these other departments. As we see formed, we don't see any of the legality behind them. Number one, of these many departments that have been formed over the years. That's number one. Number two, we don't see any legality for the CIA, for the NSA, for the FBI. We don't see any legality for the Homeland Security. We don't see any legality on even the State Department. We don't see any legality on nothing for any form of civilian intelligence. We see nothing for Department of Education being legal under this. All these forms are essentially unconstitutional. And another one we find is that we see that, which is a big problem, is the war on drugs is not constitutional. We looked at the alcohol prohibition. That had a constitutional amendment. Even the progressives back then knew that you needed a constitutional amendment. Well, when it comes to the prohibition on drugs, they go, "Oh, the UN told us so," as we with an actual agenda. So what do? They basically just write a law for the DEA. And what do through the judicial branch? They go, "Oh, we'll just give them deference and just say they can do it." And this is all what we saw from them. And being that this is not a large document, I mean, we're talking, I went over it pretty much with a fine-tooth comb of all that it had for the important issues in about 90 minutes. 90 minutes, I went over the whole thing with a fine-tooth comb. Now, most other documents, I would have to take a lot longer of a time, and it would be a lot more difficult. Now, I'm probably going to go more in depth if I go over individual pieces and see how they actually apply. But what it goes down to is I went over the fine-tooth comb to explain all this stuff in a rant and show how they can't even come up to this part with it. And people go, "Oh, we need a constitutional convention." A constitutional convention? You think that that's going to solve this? If they can't even handle the smallest document, what do you think means that they're not even file this Constitution? What thinks you make they're going to actually file something else? They're not. They're basically going to do whatever the hell they want to do. And they're actually talking about socialism. And I proved that socialism is not even constitutional. Socialism is completely unconstitutional. And this is what we're seeing. We're seeing these morons say, "Yay, socialism." Well, guess what? Because we actually show that socialism is slavery and indentured servitude, you can't have socialism, idiots. And because we've had the war on drugs for over 40 years, and that isn't constitutional. They just said, "Oh, but we have this DEA." Just because you have a DEA does not mean it's constitutional. You install the DEA, and basically you never even made a constitutional amendment to state that the drugs that people were using were unconstitutional substances. That's basically, if they would have installed some type of thing for actual just alcohol, that would have been massively unconstitutional, and it would have been thrown out back then. The actual Chief Justice back then would have, as far as I know, would have been Taft, and Taft would have thrown that out immediately. If we would have actually had someone on the ball back when we had Nixon, when we actually had a horrible, during the 70s, when we actually had a horrible judicial branch. This is when we had Roe v. Wade, when they were not paying attention. We also had this war on drugs when they weren't paying attention. And then even a little bit before then, we also had them establish such things as the NSA when they weren't paying attention. And this is what you get. You get morons who essentially establish these things because they do not know what they're doing. We get basically horrible, horrible things. And then when you go back to the actual progressive era, they go, "Oh, we're just establishing this tax on the rich." Really? This is what they did under Woodrow Wilson. We're just establishing this tax on the rich. Really? Now we have basically everyone paying tax. Now we have these people saying, "Oh, we need to establish these estate taxes." at 77%. Yeah, you really think that's only going to be on the wealthy? Guess what? That's going to be on everyone. And when they're talking about we need to pay for all these programs, guess what? When they start talking about these tax rates at the top rates that are double of what they were under Obama, guess what? That means everyone's tax rates are going to be double. It doesn't take a genius. That's what they want. If you want to pay for all this garbage, and at best, you need to double everyone's tax rates. That's the only way it can happen. That means the poor people are going to be spending a minimum of 20% in tax rates. These are the people at the way bottom. The bottom of the barrel, the people who are basically flipping burgers at McDonald's. Basically, 1 out of every $5 is gone to the government. That's just federally. Then when it comes to the state, 1 out of every $10 is gone for them. So basically, before they know it, 30% of their actual check is gone. And this is what your generous people like Bernie Sanders are doing for these people. Yeah, you know those nice guy Bernie Sanders and nice girl Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. That's what they're doing. They're trying to steal 30% of that check from that poor person flipping burgers all day. And they're trying to say, "Hey, we're giving you free stuff." Yeah, well, guess what? When they can't afford to pay their actual rent and they're living out in their car, how much of that free stuff really gonna matter? Now, if you like this rant, like, subscribe, click the notification bell, share this with all your friends on social media, and I will see you probably tomorrow, because this was a little bit of a long rant. And bye, everyone.